Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Gyo Kim. North Korea issued threats against the United States and South Korea, claiming their joint military exercise will result in the two allies feeling a serious security crisis every minute. And North Korea stopped answering South Korea's phone calls on the hotlines only 2 weeks after it agreed to reopen the communication channels. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining me is Bruce Bechtol, Professor of Political Science at Angelo State University. Professor Bechtol formerly served at the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency and authored the book, North Korean Military Proliferation in the Middle East and Africa. Ken Gause also joins me today. Mr. Gause is director of CNA's Adversary Analytics program. He has spent the last 20 years examining leadership dynamics of authoritarian regimes. His latest book is North Korean House of Cards, Leadership Dynamics under Kim Jong-un. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
Let me start with you, Dr. Bechtol. The joint military exercise has kicked off on the Korean Peninsula. According to the South Korean media reports, the exercise has been scaled back, and North Korea first demanded it to be canceled and now threatens the U.S. and South Korea for carrying out with their plans. What is behind North Korea's latest moves?
Well, first of all, I know there have been reports in the press, although very few, that have said this exercise has been scaled back. I've heard nothing of that kind whatsoever. My understanding is this exercise is going forward as planned, and that the ROK and U.S. will be carrying out a typical command post exercise like they've done in August nearly every year since the 1990s. So I think the purpose of the North Korean rhetoric is they were hoping this exercise would be canceled altogether. And perhaps they were even hoping that because of the exacerbated issues associated with COVID, that the United States and the ROK might cancel this exercise. That has not happened. They are already involved in the pre-exercise activities. If I could state, for the first time among probably many this morning, are very important for the military readiness of Combined Forces Command and the Combined Forces Command and Control that these two great nations need to maintain by participating in these exercises.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bechtol, to follow up on that, the U.S. and South Korea are focusing their joint exercise on the computer simulation without large-scale exercises. Some people say this is not enough. Does this month's exercise still help boost the readiness of the two allies?
The ULCHI exercises are typically command post exercises that are conducted by the ROK and the U.S. in various command posts across the country, especially places like CP Tango and at CFC headquarters. That's what these exercises have always been for many years. I participated in some of these exercises, both on active duty and as a professor, as an observer. So if people are saying that because these are exercises consisting mostly of simulations, that's not a change. That's not toning down the exercise. That's in following with what normally happens in August when these joint and combined exercises occur. And one last thing, with UPCON transition on the horizon, these exercises are very important because they can actually go out and exercise using simulations how that UPCON transition will work in time of conflict or crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Gause, now I'll turn to you. Did North Koreans really think South Korea will cancel the joint military exercise when they agreed to reconnect the communication hotlines?
My view is that, and I agree with what Dr. Bechtol said, is that the North Koreans would like to see these exercises canceled. It's something they're always called for at this time of the year. Whether they did or not, I kind of doubt that they expected that we would completely cancel them, maybe scale them back somewhat. But I think they reestablished the hotline in order to have something that they could pressure South Korea on. And they see this as a good opportunity to drive a wedge between the United States and South Korea, because they know that there are sentiments in South Korea that push back against these exercises, and North Korea sees this as a convenient opportunity to push that agenda as they go forward toward their larger strategic agenda of dealing with the United States and South Korea.
There was some allegations in South Korea that two Koreas agreed to reconnect direct communications on a precondition, but South Korea's presidential office dismissed such an allegation. Do you think the North Korean regime feel the same way?
I think that the North Koreans, there may not have been a deal made to reestablish these, but I think there was an implied deal, at least from the North Koreans' perspective, that by engaging this was sending strategic messages to primarily South Korea, but also the United States, about potential engagement. And they knew that this would raise the pressure, especially within the Blue House, about wanting to do anything they could to prevent that momentum from being pushed back against, which, of course, they knew the North Koreans would hold out these exercises as being something of hostile policy toward the North. And so therefore, they were really kind of setting up something where they would have something that they could take away if these exercises went forward. And now we see they've gone calm silent on the hotline. And of course, that has raised concerns in South Korea.
Dr. Bechtol, the U.S. government made it clear that it holds no hostile intent toward North Korea, reiterating the joint military exercises are purely defensive in nature. However, the North Korean regime threatened that the regime will make the U.S. and South Korea realize what a serious security crisis they will face because of their wrong choice. Should we be worried about this statement? Some North Korean watchers say North Korea may turn to provocations.
Well, it's certainly a possibility. We've seen them do that in the past. There's all kinds of provocations that they could conduct. Everyone here, you, me, and Ken Gause, we've all seen them do provocations in the Northern Limit Line or on the DMZ. Those are what I would call provocations, violent acts meant to inflict casualties. I would not call doing something like launching a ballistic missile or, having a big exercise, although the summer training cycle is nearly finished anyway. I would not call that a provocation. It may be considered provocative behavior. But again, going back to, the exercise in August goes all the way back many, many years. They used to do a big team spirit exercise, as you may remember, in March and April. They don't do that anymore. When I say they, I mean the U.S. and the ROK. So not always, but from time to time, the North Korean military has conducted provocations during either the big winter exercise that takes place between the combined forces of the U.S. ROK or in the late summer, as we're seeing now. So it's certainly a possibility. One thing that I would say may keep that from happening is we just don't know what the readiness of the North Korean military is right now because of COVID. It may be very possible that they themselves may not be able to do some things that they would prefer to do simply because they have such a high infection rate. We simply don't know that, at least in unclassified channels, which is what I see, because North Korea is so opaque. But getting back to your original question, it's certainly a possibility. Is it a likelihood? That's hard to tell because of the very unusual circumstances that we're in right now.
Right. Mr. Gause, what is your interpretation of the North Korean regime's threats?
I think that the North Koreans were expected to make threats if we were going to go forward with the exercises. That's just what they do. The question is, in terms of provocation, is what's their calculus right now? Is their calculus to try to reset the table in terms of setting the table for some sort of engagement in the future? If we look back at 2015 with the DMZ incident, which took place during this period, of the exercises. It does provide a justification for North Korea to do something. The question is whether they want to, whether it fits into their overall calculus, whether they think they can get something in return, or is it just going to be an empty gesture? If it's going to be an empty gesture, I highly doubt that they will do anything, be it a provocation or a test. But if they believe that there is something to be gained, then potentially they could do something. I think this month and really running through October, when we have the celebration of the party, this would be the opportunity if North Korea is going to do anything in terms of tests or provocations to really kind of justify internally and kind of set the chessboard for future strategic actions such as engagement or so forth. But if we don't see that, then as Dr. Bechtol said, they are wrestling with a lot of internal issues right now that really, I think, highly constrains what they might do. And so I would not necessarily say that we're going to see provocations or tests in the near future.
Right. Mr. Gause, Kim Yo-jong, the younger sister of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, also claimed that as long as there is U.S. military presence in South Korea, the source of calamity will not be eradicated on the Korean peninsula. This is the first time since 2018 that the North Korean regime bringing up the issue of the U.S. forces in Korea. What did you make of this?
Well, yeah, I think they're using the issue of U.S. troops on the peninsula, obviously strategically in their long-term goal. They would like to see the U.S. off the peninsula, obviously. The question is whether they want to make it a tactical argument. We saw in 2018 they kind of backed away from it, but now that they have brought it up, it really is trying, I think, to put pressure again in that South Korean-U.S. relationship about the North Korean frustrations that they are feeling right now. And it is a convenient way of raising the temperature and really kind of expressing North Korean frustration that they're feeling about where their current situation is. Does it mean they really want us off the peninsula tomorrow, or they're going to do something? Again, kind of hard for them to do much of anything right now, but it's more, I think, of a strategic signaling than anything else.
Dr. Bechtol, your thought? Did it catch your attention?
It's also important to note that in the short term, North Korea is constantly trying to drive a wedge into the alliance. In other words, get the South Koreans and the Americans bickering amongst each other, or having differing points of view or a different vision about where the alliance is going. I don't think that's going to be possible this time. I think the Biden administration and the Moon administration are about as close as they can be. Remember, we just had a summit where they agreed on what the special measures agreement was going to be. And in previous years, that was a big point of contention with both sides, right? Well, it's not an issue anymore. And in fact, you know, the research that I did when you asked me to do this interview a few days ago shows both sides agree, including President Moon and President Biden, that this is a necessary and important aspect of the ROK-US alliance, conducting these exercises in the summertime. So, I mean, that may be the reason that if, instead of trying to get us going at each other, that the North Koreans simply said that ridiculous statement that U.S. troops need to leave the peninsula. I don't think that's, you know, I don't think that's going to be popular in South Korea. And I can tell you for sure, whether you're a Democrat or Republican in Congress, that's never going to fly. Korea is widely considered, the ROK is widely considered one of our most important allies, and American troop presence on the Korean Peninsula is considered one of our most important deployments. So it was a very bellicose statement. It was very threatening, but it doesn't mean anything because it's simply not going to happen.
Right. Mr. Gause, at this stage, does the Biden administration have any reason to accept North Korea's demands when it is not responding to the U.S. calls to engage in talks?
don't think it makes much sense right now to pay too much attention to these threats that North Korea is showing. Again, this is something that should be expected. This is something North Korea does on a regular basis. There are other ways that they can push forward an agenda toward engagement if that's what they want. But they're not doing that right now. And the United States, hasn't been willing to put, things on the table for engagement. I would say both sides right now are pretty much kind of holding pat to their traditional strategies. So I would not expect there to be any movement toward talks or any movement toward the United States accepting or being intimidated by what North Korea is doing right now.
Dr. Bechtol, how should and will the U.S. respond to this?
Well, I think the U.S. will respond by continuing the exercise as planned. And that leads me, and again, let me point out probably the most important thing about this exercise is it gives ROK and U.S. senior leaders who would be involved in a conflict or a crisis on the peninsula a chance to practice their command and control capabilities, to exercise them. That's what an exercise is all about. When it comes to engaging us or not engaging us, I think at least in the short term, North Korea is most interested. We talk North Korea, Kim Jong-un and his sister, of course, and his inner circle. What they're most interested in is getting some of those sanctions dropped. And I think that they're really hoping that the Biden administration will be different than the Trump administration in easing some of those sanctions. To be frank, I don't think that's likely, but it certainly would be the ideal situation for the North Koreans, because those sanctions combined with the COVID crisis have really hurt the North Koreans economically for about the past 18 months or so.
Right. Mr. Gause, North Korea is now refusing to answer daily phone calls from South Korea on the communication hotlines in an apparent protest against the U.S.-South Korea military exercise. What is North Korea's political calculations behind all this?
Well, as I said earlier, the North Koreans are basically using this as a wedge issue. They set it up to be a wedge issue so that they are holding out promise to the South Koreans of some sort of positive movement toward engagement. And by setting up the hotline, it is given South Korea a certain amount of hope that they may have made some progress with North Korea. Now they have a convenient tool that they can pull away from. And that's what we're seeing with them not answering the hotline, going calm silent. It really is kind of exacting punishment on South Korea for not following through in pressuring the U.S. to back off on the exercises. So this is a completely expected tactic on North Korea's point of view. It doesn't mean that they set up that hotline as to reestablish military communications. This is all political maneuvering by North Korea.
All right. And Dr. Bechtol, how would you analyze this whole situation?
Well, I think that both the government of the ROK and the government of the United States should be commended for continuing with this exercise as planned, despite the rhetoric of the North Koreans. And obviously, as we saw over the past couple or 3 years or so, the exercise has been affected in various ways by the rhetoric of the North Koreans. In other words, it was toned down. Sometimes once we just didn't have it at all. I don't think that's likely anymore, because I think both the United States government and the ROK government realize that they get nothing out of not running this exercise except hurting their readiness. And that's a big deal. So I think these exercises are going to continue. I think we'll probably see a very normal, routine, but still robust winter exercise this February. Because I think both sides, the ROK side and the American side, realize that by toning down these exercises or not doing them at all, they've gotten nothing from the North Koreans. So I'd expect that the end result of this situation is that they will focus on maintaining readiness of the ROK-US alliance and preparing for OPCON transition.
And my last question for today, Dr. Bechtol first. From what has happened so far, what do you expect to see in the near future? What kind of moves do you expect both from the US and North Korea?
Well, I think a couple of things affect this situation here. One is we've seen a review, as both you and Mr. Gause know, we've seen a review of North Korea policy by the Biden administration, right? They completed that recently. I'm sure that the North Koreans are going to try and look at that, analyze it, and see how they can use that to get some concessions from both the South Koreans and the Americans. So I think they're going to push for engagement perhaps in coming months. If and when either one, that does not happen, I think that then we will start to see more active provocative behavior on the part of the North Koreans if their military is ready. And again, there's that wrench thrown into the works of we just don't know how badly COVID has affected the readiness of the North Korean military. But if trying engagement with the United States and South Korea does not work and they don't get any concessions, the normal modus operandi, as you know, for the North Koreans is, well, then let's start conducting provocations. So I think those two possibilities are what we can be looking at over the next 4 to 7 months.
Mr. Gause, there are some views that North Korea is beefing up its threats because they want to lay the blame of the internal difficulties on the United States and the outside world. Do you agree with this view? And what will be the next moves for North Korea as well as for the US?
Well, always blaming the outside in order to set the agenda internally is something that the North Koreans do. So I suspect that is part of why they're doing this, to show the elites that they're doing everything they can. One, to show strength in the face of an impending threat, as they paint the U.S. Especially. But also to deflect some of the blame for the economic problems that they face. They want to engage. They want to figure out how to get out from under some of these sanctions. And so this is part of the game that they're playing to kind of raise the temperature and then look for what they can in terms of engagement. But if that doesn't work, I agree that there is a good chance that we will see a return to some sort of brinksmanship strategy, if they are able to engage in that. At some point, they're going to pass a threshold in their thinking in which they're going to say that the chessboard basically needs to be thrown up in the air and we need to start again. And the best way that they have done that in the past is to do either a provocation or a test.
Pinning the joint military exercise between the United States and South Korea as the reason North Korea is escalating tensions on the peninsula with its own bellicose rhetoric. It is being closely watched whether North Korea will choose military provocation with new weapons to test on the hand. Dr. Bechtol and Mr. Gause, thank you so much for being with us today.
Nice to
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.